Ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all to India HR Live. As you all know, this is a live panel discussion happening at India HR Live, and today we have an interesting topic because most of you really wanting to hear more about HR tech implementation. I know, right? It's a painful deal, but we spend 10 lot of money and time in researching and finding out the best technology out there, and then when it comes to implementation, there are a lot of crazy stories out there, but stay tuned. We will get to know more about how to have a successful HR tech implementation with the help of our panelists over here at India HR Live. And stay tuned. And if you have any questions to our panel, stay tuned with the hashtag India HR Live, and we will be able to pull that up if you have any questions or any thoughts. So let's meet our guest, and today we supposed to have Anand Pillai and Abhishek Badri and Anil Kumar Mishra, and we are waiting for them, and they will chime in at any point. So without further ado, let me welcome Jeremy Ames. Jeremy is the CEO of Hive Tech HR. Hey Jeremy, welcome to India HR Live. Jeremy, can you hear us? I guess we have some technical glitches. And
Hi, Nisha. Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Great. Hi.
All right. So, Jeremy, why don't you kick off the show by giving our audience a brief intro of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Ames. I'm the president and CEO of Hive Tech HR. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry. Just we are implementation partners for some vendors, and we also help out our clients with implementations. And I've personally used to implement for software vendors prior to starting my own company. So that's kind of my background on implementation, and it's also we're about to publish an article on it through Tech Target. So it's a topic I'm very passionate about, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Great. So, how did you get started with the HR tech industry? Give us a little glance to your career path on how did you start with HR tech first of all, and what was the idea to kick off Hive Tech HR?
So I worked at Fidelity for a long time doing systems work. I had also done some consulting work, and it always centered on technology. It always centered on workplace technology. And then I made a natural transition into a HR software vendor called NewView. Worked for them for several years doing implementations and managing a team of implementation people. And then went out on my own, started my own gig to try to focus in and increase the effectiveness of the implementations that I was working on. So that's kind of how I ended up, and we were originally called Gaucho Group, and then rebranded ourselves beginning of last year as Hive Tech HR. Hive I consider kind of like the concept of a workplace and the way a workplace functions, so that's where we came up with that name.
All right. So now we have William who has joined with us. William, are you there? We at India HR Live, we normally don't have this much of technical glitches, but for this show, I don't know, for some reason, we have all sorts of technical problems out there, and William was right there, and at this point, I'm not able to hear him. So, Jeremy, why don't you, talk a little bit about, you always go to all the events of HR technology updates out there, even if it is HR technology conference here in United States and in Europe, and you travel across the globe, and you have a tremendous amount of clients that you help them when it comes to choosing the right technology and how to have a successful implementation. So tell our audience what are some top 5 factors for successful HR tech implementation.
Top 5 factors. I mean, the number one factor I would say is all has to do with how you prepare for the implementation, even before you've completed signing with your new product that you're going to be that you're buying. So a lot of pre-work has to happen. A lot of questions from the vendor. Whether or not you can meet your implementation team, whether or not they use implementation partners, how long things are going to take. So there's a lot. That first factor is how well you one person who is capable of getting you from start to finish. That's something that I've seen missing quite often in an implementation, that really strong person, because there's a lot of different players that go into an implementation. There's the vendor that you're dealing with. If sometimes they're the implementer, but in some cases they're not. There's the client that you're dealing with. There's a lot of times the whole implementation team. There are benefit carriers, payroll vendors. There's a whole host of people, and you need that one person to kind of keep them all unified and together. So those are probably my top two factors.
Wonderful, thank you. So William is back over here. William, can you hear us?
I can, and it's amazing.
This is interesting.
It only took a minute. Sorry, y'all.
No problem, no problem. Tell us a little bit about yourself, William.
I'm a Virgo. My favorite color is turquoise. No, I'm just kidding. I kind of came up through marketing. I think as most people, if they follow me, they kind of know that I have a kind of a marketing slant to things. I can't avoid that. Then got into consulting to find out that consulting is really a whole lot like agency life or marketing life. And John Sumter and I created a research firm, an analyst firm, in the latter part of last year, and we're studying kind of the realities, if you will. What really goes on behind the desk. And for me, it's very humbling at 46 years old to basically be unlearning a lot of the things that I thought I knew over the last 15 years, truisms and platitudes and generalities that I've thrown out there that are actually, most of them are incorrect. So a lot of what I've been going through for the last couple of months is kind of tearing down what I thought I knew and coming to grips with that the world wasn't as easy or simplistic as I thought it was, and that the realities of practitioners when they interact with technologies is far more complex. It's probably stuff that Jeremy knows really easily because he's been doing a lot of implementations, but truth is there's a lot of noise out there, and the noise becoming louder and louder in both the blogosphere, the echo chamber, and vendor marketing noise. Quite frankly, vendors do a lot of both education, but education to an end. And so it's real noisy, and the more you talk to practitioners, the more you learn that their realities is different than both the echo chamber's representation of them and vendors' representation of them. But what am I doing now? Researching, learning.
Well, that is great, and we're so excited for you because the reason is, now you're working with key interval research means people get a lot of information from that platform. And personally, I should give a shout out to you through India HR Live platform because of you, I'm here doing this hosting over here at India HR Live because all the hosting skills that I learned is from Drive-Thru HR. So thank you for that opportunity for bringing me on Drive-Thru HR, the #1 internet daily radio show. So if you are out there, if you haven't check it out, Drive-Thru HR. So William, we were talking about some of the top 5 factors for successful HR tech implementation. So what would you say throughout your experience, because you have been traveling all over the globe, over here in the United States, you have been an advisor for many, many organizations, and you talk at various conferences, even HR Tech conference is one of the important conferences in your list, and HR Tech Europe is as well, and now you're traveling to India. So what are some 5 factors for
Sure.
successful HR tech implementation?
Well, Jeremy is also. I think he probably already told you, but I couldn't hear it. But
Yeah.
he's speaking at the same event, so we're going to be traveling together in some ways. I think the first thing that I've kind of come to grips with most that I think that we have a simplistic look at. We're just switching out technology. We're going from one payroll HRIS to another payroll HRS, and so it's easy. But truth is, I think that the practitioner reality is that that's actually a transformational moment to then look at process, look at people, look at the team, train people in a different way. And so they're not looking at those things, those switching out of technologies as just, oh yeah, just switch them out like you do your cars. So I think, Nisha, the first thing I'd say to the audience is that if you're thinking about it as you're just switching tech, you're probably not thinking about it correctly in some ways. You probably should be taking the moment to think, how are we doing this? How should we be doing this? What should the underlying processes be, and should we change that? And so this transformational moment going from one technology to another, I think is probably job number one. The second thing I'd look at is user satisfaction, which is not something that we talk a lot about. But at the end of the day, how can users be happy in the technology that they use every day? Like, what can we do to drive user satisfaction? So user satisfaction looks like, I'm happy in the software that I use. I love the software that I use. So it's not just about adoption. Like, the adoption game is still a very important one, and it's actually one I'd have right after user satisfaction is, what are we going to do to train people? Like, at the end of the day, how do we get people to train up on the technology? Because it's not enough to just throw the technology in their lap. You've got to, whether or not that's the implementation partner or the vendor or the train-the-trainer model, like there's probably 100 models here, but how do we get people to know the ins and outs of that technology? So first of all, one is transformational moment. What are we doing? How do we look at our underlying processes? 2, user satisfaction. 3, I would look at user adoption, but really specific at look at training. How do we train people in the technology? The 4th one is change management, and really looking at the old way, new way. And so what we miss in change management is that people might have been confident and competent in the technology, and then we changed things on them. So we went from, and we'll use real brands just for giggles, we went from ADP to Ultimate Software. Okay, that seems benign, but to the payroll administrator that's been working in ADP for 20 years, that's not benign. That's a real substantive change that could affect morale. It could affect engagement, retention. So it has other issues. So when we look at change, we really need to look at the old way of doing things, and how we want to do them in the future. And so we need to plot change. And the last thing I'd say, if you need 5, is communications. What are we doing to communicate technology change? What are we doing to communicate to all the users what's going on with technology? Why did we change? What are we doing? What vendors did we look at? How did we go through the process? But ultimately, it's a communication strategy. It's ripping a page from the playbook of marketing, or at least employee communications, and communicating to all of the different user groups and stakeholders. So those are the 5. So if we go back through them, it's looking at transformational moment, and looking at your underlying processes and evaluating those, looking at user satisfaction, user adoption, specifically training, change management, communication strategy.
Great, thank you. Well,
Sure.
we have Abhijit Badri joined with
Oh, good.
us. Hi, sir.
Hey,
are you there?
how are you? Very good indeed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today on your busy schedule. I know you have been traveling and then just got to your home or the location that you are right now. So we are
That's
really,
right.
really honored to have you at this point. So say hi to our India HL Live audience.
Hey, how are you, everyone? And good to see many of the people who I've only interacted with on Twitter or social media. So good to be here with you guys. Hey, William.
I know.
and
Pleasure.
everyone.
Same here.
Hey.
Great. So we kind of kicked off the show talking about the top 5 successful
Yes.
factors for HR tech implementation. So William, he has pointed out 5 factors. Even Jeremy also added to that as transformation, user satisfaction, and then change management and communication are some of the most important factors. So what do you suggest? Would you like to add something to that point?
I think, the ability to communicate with different kinds of media, because media really changes behavior. So the dominant media of the time actually determines a lot of things, how we communicate. And in my mind, that change management process that William talked about, I just got the last bit of it. I think a lot of that is really around, how do you get people to adopt your technology or whatever change that you're driving. Change of behavior from method A to method B, a lot of it actually has to do with getting people, so communicating with them in the media that people are most comfortable with. So choice of media makes an enormous difference. For example, and each of them have their own idiom of, so to speak. So the way that you communicate with somebody, face to face is different from, let's say, if you were doing it on video conference or on Twitter. And that the ability to understand the nuances of communication of that dominant medium of that time actually determines a lot of that, a lot of the success of the change management process. Because I think, besides, of course, the ability to get people comfortable and trained in the use of whatever technology we are getting them to get used to, more than that, I think it's also really around ensuring that people are communicated, you talk to them using the medium and the key messages in the manner that they are most comfortable with. And every organization, every country, there are different dominant patterns.
For some reason, we lost Mr.
Well, one of the points that really struck me was, and it's a phrase we use here in the States. It's probably maybe outside the States, but it's meeting users where they are, and the idea and when medium and the medium, the message, but meeting people where they are is so important to let users drive that. Like instead of top-down strategy and say, we're going to email everybody every other day and let them know.
Yeah.
That was it. So meeting users, letting users drive. I'd like these communications in this form, in this and cadence. I think is really, really super smart. That stuck with me.
All right. Well, going back to your first point that you said about the transformation and the process design, there is a question that has come up on Twitter, and especially for you, and that is from Amit Avasti. He is asking, what ensures success of implementation? Good process or good tech consultants? To you, William.
All right. So I think processes, and Jeremy and I will probably fist fight over this, but I think process eats technology. So I think you have to have your process right. You can lay, so here's how I kind of come to that, and then again, challenge the logic. I think you can lay mediocre technology on a great process and still get there. Yet if you flip those, it doesn't work. So I think process always wins, and I think we have to challenge our processes to always make them better. So what do we need to do to innovate our processes? So tech consulting, I think tech consulting, if we layer that into process, the beauty of consulting is that they get to see a lot of processes in where they work and where they don't. Most importantly, where they don't, and how they break. So I think the folks that actually do that type of work, where they're going in and out of different client interactions, where they see fail, 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 I think you have a chance of success because they're helping you navigate all the failure. So I believe that consultants can help you get to a better, stronger, better process. But I think process eats technology.
Well, and if I can jump in here, there's two aspects that you have to be very specific when you're talking about process, because there's two very distinct angles to the word process. There's an implementation process, and that's extremely important when you're defining the success of an implementation. That means all the tools, all the steps that take you from that first kickoff, that first time you meet the client, the person who wants to have this software successfully implemented, on through to the moment that they're live, and in fact even beyond that, and when their users are actually using the system. So that's one angle of process, and that absolutely has to be extremely tight and repeatable, but also somewhat agile in order for an implementation to be successful. But then there's the other angle of the word process, which has to do with all the HR processes, all the internal company processes that you're layering the technology on top of. And as William's saying, those have to be in tip-top shape and well-defined and all of that in order for the implementation to be successful. So if both of those things are successful, then you're in good shape. If only one is, then you're not. So
we definitely supposed to have a process design. That's what you guys are saying, right? So,
yeah.
So from that aspect,
I'll say something.
Go ahead, sir. From an HR point of view, or from a user point of view, what would you like to add?
I think when you have two, when there is one particular kind of a, system that is getting replaced with another, I think that the way to look at it is, the trapeze artists, when they are leaving one particular swing and going on to another, there is an in-between time when they are in neither place, so they're neither using the previous swing, nor are they in the new swing. It is that in-between time which you need to, bridge through that communication. And for me, the success of leaving one particular structure and process and going on to another, people are less concerned, in my opinion, about which process they are abandoning or which one they are adopting, as long as there is that whole comfort zone that you build in, because it's also about creating new habits. It's about creating new ecosystems. It's about creating new networks. So I think one of the, to me, there is only, so the ability to identify not just the medium, but also the influencers, that becomes another very important process that I think sometimes we don't really deal with as much of, effort and prep of the importance of actually making that communication structured and really think through what medium, when will you do it, who is going to do it, who has the credibility to do it, who are your influences. And, to me, it's really around that process that makes all the difference.
A quick follow-up, Nisha, to that.
Yeah.
Something that John and I just realized when we were studying implementations is it's spot on that if you sell it internally as a transformational project, you can use different words, but basically if you get great people internally bought in to the implementation. So some of that is getting folks internally sold on the idea of change, right? Which is nobody likes change. To do that is to sell it as a transformational moment, a transformational project that gets some of your better people internally engaged in that change. So it's totally spot on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you just define it as a data migration project, you're not gonna get people jazzed up. But if they know they're changing the face of the company, that's when you're really gonna get, people are gonna insist that they're involved rather than trying to avoid having to do the work.
Absolutely. And Jeremy, one of the points that I wanted to highlight is, when we talk about HR, we really need to consider other systems as well, because we need to work with other functions like marketing, in finance, or even procurement, or any other incoming payment?
I mean, all those different functions should be involved from the beginning. Whether or not they participate throughout an implementation is debatable, but they need to have a say. They need to be informed about the change because there could be very important interfaces that need to be built. If you get in early enough, there could be considerations as to whether or not you're choosing the right system that's going to, basically support all the other functions of a company. But again, during the actual implementation itself, really there's a large group of people who may need to be informed of the status and the progress of the implementation, but not necessarily be involved in the day-to-day work itself.
All right, and then let's talk about properly staffed project team. When we talk about having HR tech implementation, the role of an IT, we cannot deny the fact of the help that we require from the IT team, right? And especially as you, William said, the buy-in from the leaders. Absolutely, we cannot deny the fact. But when we talk about the project team, we're to suggest who should all be involved in this project team. William, you go ahead first.
Sure. I think first of all, I think IT is a great collaborator. I think for years, I think they've been positioned as haters and blockers, and you might have some of that. Jeremy probably runs into some of the propeller heads that are there and fill that stereotype. But I think as SaaS has taken off, especially in HR and recruiting, I think that there's less of that, and I think that first of all, there's a lot of great learns over in IT. About a lot of the organization, so to not have them involved, it's probably at our peril. To what depth? I think Jeremy already kind of hit that. I think it's they need to be there in case they see something that we're doing that's legal, and so they can help us avoid failure. So we should want to engage IT in some ways on a higher level and say, hey, we would like your advice. We'd like for you to be involved. What's the best course of action here? And so we should collaborate with them, a true collaboration where we respect their advice and opinions, and vice versa. They respect our advice and opinions as well. But I think back in the day when everything was client server or on premise, I think that we had a different relationship. HR had a different relationship with IT. I think that is. Unless you're dealing with the largest of companies, I think that's not as true anymore. Jeremy, what's your take?
I mean, the short answer, William and Nisha and everyone listening, is that they should be involved. So the long answer is this highlights kind of why I love implementations, because I'm actually a fiction writer. I enjoy writing fiction, and to me an implementation is a story. And the biggest part of a story is who are the actors in it, who are the protagonists, who are the antagonists. And I think the role of IT in an implementation takes such different forms in every client that I've ever implemented that it's exciting to me, and it's exciting finding out, are they going to be an antagonist? Are they going to be the people who are fighting this implementation, trying to hold on to their territory? And I don't care if this is SaaS, but we want to make sure that we're the owners of the data, we're the owners of the processes, or are they going to be a protagonist? Are they going to be just that group that says, okay, we're here to support you, whatever you need, HR, whatever you need, finance, we're here, to provide that backup, and we'll own it afterwards, but you guys own the data, all that. So it varies so much, especially today. Before it was pretty cut and dry. It was basically a fight. It was a drag-out fight almost every time before. Now it could be a happy-go-lucky, everyone's supporting each other, or it could still be that territorial thing. So it's actually very interesting.
Well, Jeremy, you and Mr. Abhijit Badri have so many things in common because he also loves fiction a lot. He wrote 3 books which is in HR, and other than that, he writes review for many movies, which is a blockbuster hit. So that is again one of the interesting things that I really wanted to let you know about Mr. Abhijit Badri. So, right. Sir, tell us about what are your takes when it comes to, do we need to add IT and other functions when it comes to having a successful HR implementation?
I think the world as it looks from the user's point of view and the world as it looks from the HR or IT or marketing point of view, whichever function that you're looking at, I think those worldviews are different. For somebody it could be I remember when I looked at the implementation of an HR system, across many different countries. Every country that you go into, I mean, the cultural norms are very different. So, who you communicate with, in some places, they would get the entire management team would be in the room and they would sort of take individual responsibility. In some cases, you pretty much deal with just HR and IT. And in some cases, you have another function which helps, you had marketing involved in crafting the communication. I think I've seen many different models. However, I think what I want to talk about, I just love Jeremy's example of fiction, the way that you talk about it as a story. I think that's probably a great, way to understand this whole process. I would like to build on that same thing, that, the way the user looks at this migration, they actually really, to them, what is happening at the back end pretty much really doesn't matter. I mean, just imagine when you get the, the download, you get a message which says your operating system needs to be updated. You really don't care about the enormous work that would have gone on in the background, from operating system so and so version to another version. If you think about it, what it means to the techie who writes the code, I mean, it's completely different. The guy who's in charge of data migration, it's different. To the user, it simply means that the experience needs to be seamless. I just need to update my stuff and continue doing, whatever I was doing. So it's almost like somebody interrupted mid-sentence and I'm going to continue exactly where I left off. The best implementations actually look at a user experience like this. So in doing this entire thing, it's important to be able to prepare the people that, okay, when you do this, here is the change process. So the more number of stakeholders, that you have who are involved, who are going to be affected, I think the easier it becomes, because there are that many people who will look at potentially what could go wrong. And I was reading about, there are many, not just organizations, but today if you look at, there are countries which are doing data migration, and there's a fascinating piece that, the Economist talks about how Estonia as a country is now trying to look at taking a backup of their entire digital existence and looking at a disaster recovery process. Just that whole process to look at, it's no longer just an IT versus user interface. I mean, so where are they going to store the data? What rights will they have? I mean, what happens to the data privacy? So there is a legal person who's involved, there is an IT person who's involved, there's a marketing person who's involved, there's a constitutional person involved. So more and more, actually, these changes that we are looking at, any kind of an IT system, actually is a multi-user, multi-stakeholder kind of a process. So therefore, the more people that we are able to sort of connect up into this whole migration process, the more the user is going to be able to get a seamless experience. So to me, what happens in the background is really, like in a play. I mean, the audience really likes to see an uninterrupted sequence. Whereas the people who are helping backstage or the one who's helping with the sound or light may have a completely different experience of that play. So it really depends on where you are sitting.
Correct. Well, we are almost halfway through at this point, and I wanted to give a big shout out to our audience. And if you would like to ask any questions, hit the hashtag IndiaHRLive, and we will be able to pull that up. And I can see many tweets out there. And thank you so much for putting up with our technical glitches in the beginning, and then staying tuned to India HR Live, and we really appreciate that. So Mr. Abhijit Badri has talked a little bit about user adoption in data migration, and as a real segue to my next question is: do we really require a data manager when it comes to a successful HR implementation? I'm talking about the specialists to manage HR tech implementation. So William, do you suggest, should we use an internal specialist to manage implementation projects?
So let me separate the two. So first of all, how do we get specialists involved is one, because there's all kinds of specialists. But as it relates to data, I think, Nisha, my gut tells me that if we're ever going to realize the aspiration of big data, and it's just an aspiration at this point, it's a bunch of hype, and if we're going to realize it, we're going to have to get right with the dirty data that we have. We're going to have to clean our data, create standards, create models in HR and recruiting where all of our data comes together, where we can actually get to tiny data, big data, realize some type of insights from the data that we're already sitting on. So on one level, do we need someone to create standards and to make sure that our data is both cleaner than it is right now, standardized in a way that we can get things out of it? Yes, I think that first of all, if we're not doing that now, we'll never realize the aspirations of big data. So that's one thing. Is that a specialist? Yeah, I think it has to be a specialist. Now, there's another interesting part of the question that's how do we get a specialist engaged in our implementation projects? Well, I think there's a way to do that, and I think it's salesmanship. I think Jeremy kind of hit it on a head, where we sell it internally. Like if we just sell something as a project or going from one ATS to another, no one's excited by that. No one's challenged by that. And you don't get your best people. You're definitely not going to get your specialists involved. And so I think there's some salesmanship that goes on from the C-suite to HR and into these projects that says we need our best, our brightest, and our specialists to game up for this implementation. So I think we can get specialists involved. I think we have to get data specialists involved, but I think we have to sell it.
Right. Well, Jeremy, would you like to add any thoughts?
Again, short answer is you need as many specialists as you can get. I mean, and they need to cross the gamut of everything you're looking for. You need that data specialist that William alluded to. You need an interface specialist. You need a product specialist. So ideally, whoever's on your implementation team needs to know that product inside and out. You need the HR functional specialist. So when you're when you're implementing performance management, you need the person who understands exactly how it's supposed to work from start to finish. You need the reporting specialist. So when you get to the point of the project when you're going to do reporting, so that way you end up with all your required, compliance-related reports, but you also end up with reports that are going to add some insights into the business. And you need that person who kind of assembles that team of, that Uber team of specialists. So, and keeps them on track, keeps them on task. So it's a huge ordeal. As soon as any of those things fall apart, your implementation could end up some percentage less than what it should be.
So from an organization point of view, or from a user point of view, tell us, how was it that transition happened at your organization? So when it comes to, did you use any specialists at your organization? Or, throughout this year, we have seen many innovative technologies. So have you ever felt like, yeah, I really need a specialist to help me through this transition? Have you ever thought about it?
I think the moment you are looking at moving the user from one experience to another, I mean, you're really talking about many different aspects of it. And I think William and Jeremy both alluded to those specialist roles. But I think one of each migration is also an opportunity to clean up the data and sort of look at now when you start to think about and if you think about how good the data is, the number of different variables that you need to track, the kind of legal requirements, the kind of things that you need for payroll, and each of it depends. The number of variables that you have, the number of users, the more complicated it gets, the more important it is to ensure that you need data specialists. Absolutely. And I think as you go across implementations that span different countries, it is very fascinating to know that what is considered mandatory, and it's you have to have that particular data field. Suddenly, when you populate that in another country, it turns out to be legal because you cannot ask somebody for that particular data. Now, in some places, you have to have the data, but you can't. Nobody needs to have access to it. So I think it's a fairly nuanced view of where the data is going to be used not just for for decision-making purposes, but also for reporting, for different users. And if you look at that whole process, I think it requires two kinds of groups. One is there is the technical piece. I mean, so therefore somebody who can tell you how that table needs to be structured so that it sort of it's easy to implement. On the other hand, I think that you also need a bunch of people who are going to talk about how is business going to benefit from this particular new shift, which is, looking at how reporting happens, how easy it is for the users to do it, the user experience of it all, the ease of, recovering data in case of a disaster, etc. So I think each step, if you look at it, of that migration actually requires a technical specialist and a business specialist who owns that particular shift. And it is this constant partnership, which is, sort of in between, managed through communication, constant communication. And if these teams are today, if you do implementation on the cloud, I mean, you also have people in different parts of the world which are, operating at different time zones. So it requires project management, it requires communication, it requires several different pieces. So I think that's the reality of life today, that it's gotten far, the number of variables in that implementation only seem to have gone up. And therefore, as things become more complex, you need more specialists.
Absolutely. So now my last question on the list that we have published on the promo blog is, how important is senior management support to implementation success? So from your point of view, sir, how was that transition happen? Have you had enough support from the entire management team in order to have the HR tech vendors coming in and then doing the implementation?
Sorry, the question's for me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The couple of different things that, where leadership, needs to get involved is in looking at putting the right kind of a, support from the user testing or at each stage. You probably require to, touch different parts of the organization. Therefore, to make that time and to give the space for the initial startup hiccups, which no matter how good technology is, there's a human experience at the other side, which also needs to be factored in. And this entire process needs to be, you need to have senior management bless that entire transition. So absolutely, yes, you need to have their buy-in. Does it mean that automatically everybody is equally excited about this whole transition? Probably not. And I think, which is why I started off by saying that I think change management is, to me, almost sort of entirely, besides if you look at the technicality, everything else is really the, getting the users excited, communicating. So there is a very, very large element of that communication, whether it is online or offline communication, so keeping them posted, getting their sponsorship when things get stuck, when the project gets delayed at every stage. Depending on how complex that issue is, you get perhaps multiple teams of senior members involved. So if you do have their sponsorship early enough, it becomes that much easier for you to draw on their support as you move.
Right. So now that we have talked about all the things considered for an HR tech implementation, now the time has come up to go live. So Jeremy, can you talk a little bit more about the go live, the concept of go live, and when an implementation done, what are the things that we should be considered when it comes to going live and how to make it successful?
That was for me, right, Nisha?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a couple things about go live. Number one, it should be a celebration. Implementations are difficult. They're not a lot of fun, and there's points in the process where you don't think you're going to get there. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get delayed. But the point is, when you do go live, it should be a celebration. Especially for the core team that worked really hard at getting there. I've just seen so many implementations that lose out on that opportunity to celebrate. And so I prefer to really push the topic of, or the concept of really celebrating that moment in time. The other aspect is don't just make it a soft go live. Don't just make it something that doesn't go noticed. It should, your go live decisions, what you go live with, should have a large impact on the organization. it shouldn't be something that's so. I mean, if you have to do payroll, obviously you do payroll, but if you can avoid doing something that could have a catastrophic effect the first time you introduce a new system to the company, you might want to do that. But at the same time, it should have an impact. It should be something that means something to the organization, whether it's benefit open enrollment, if it's the ability to get a total comp statement, if it's the ability to do your performance review online. It should be something that, number one, it makes an impact and gets people into the system. So the worst thing you can do is you can just have this go live that just fades into nothingness, and you've worked all this time, you've spent all this money, and now you're live, and everyone's like, what do we have? What is this thing?
Yeah.
So.
Correct. William, what would you like to add when it comes to Go Live concept?
Jeremy nailed it. You got to make it a big celebration. You got to weave it into the fabric, the traditions of the firm, make it a party for those especially that it really touched, but also as a recognition of all the hard work. I have probably a naive view that implementations never really end. In some ways, that at some point when there's new employees, you've got to train them in that software, and so you're constantly always kind of, even though it might have happened 18 months ago, you're still dealing with making sure users, it should never be one of those things to me that you do it and then you move on to the next thing, because you can probably get more out of the technology the more you stay in it, the more you train, the more you interact with the vendor and the consultants, and I think you can get more out of technology. So I think that Jeremy's spot on. You do a great party at the beginning, where you get everybody, you rally your troops, you point in a direction, and you do that at the point in which you feel like it's live and you're getting some value out of it. But I think there's a longer tail to the implementation than we probably ever really want to talk about. Another note, and first of all, the India HR Live hashtag is blowing up. It's fantastic. I'm probably not even going to be able to look at it until this afternoon, but it is amazing. If anyone has anything specifically for Jeremy or myself, just hit us up and we'll try to answer it as best we can. And we're going to be in Mumbai in late April at SHRM Tech. So if anyone is in Mumbai at that time, we'd love to see you. Obviously, we can answer some questions directly and hopefully in person.
Sure.
But I think the other thing around the end of implementations and tying it back up to your question before that, making sure senior leaders know what all you went through, where you're at, what you got. It's kind of closing that loop with them as well, because they've lost focus and they're on to something else as well. So I think it's critical to have senior leadership buy-in, blessing at least, on what you're doing. But I think that we miss an opportunity in HR to go back up to the group of people that kind of bless the bid and tell them the story of what went on, what successes and fails, what we're getting out of it, and what our plan is to maximize that investment in the technology. And that's a wonderful time, is when you're going live and having that celebration and making a big deal of it. That's a great time to close the loop with senior leadership.
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot of questions that has come up on our Twitter stream. So next, we will take questions from our Twitter stream. And if you're out there looking at our hashtag is IndiaHR Live, shoot your questions to our panelists. So the first question that I wanted to take is from, okay, let me pull up this, Vijay Bankar. And this question, Jeremy, if you can answer, that would be great. Does cloud-based software implementation is easier than any other system?
Any other system? I mean, I get the question. The question is more, is cloud-based easier than the traditional on-premise?
Any other technology, maybe?
Yeah. So the answer is typically yes. I mean, typically when you're implementing a cloud-based solution, you should have more tools at your disposal. It's more about configuration typically than it is about any sort of customization or, but then again, there's so much variability today in the actual vendors and what the vendors are doing. So one SaaS vendor, like Ultimate, has a completely different implementation than a Fairsail or a Workday. They all have their own way of implementing. So it's so specific to the actual vendors that it's tough to really generalize about SaaS in general. But overall, SaaS versus on-premise is actually an easier implementation, yes.
And the next question is from Ruchi Challa, and she is asking specifically to Mr. Abhijit Badri. She is asking, what is the biggest hurdle that Indian organizations face when we talk about HR tech implementation?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that we often tend to look at an HR implementation or any technical implementation more from the point of view of data, the technicality, and the transition from one computer system onto another. I think the human being, who's running through that entire thing often tends to get ignored or at least given second rung. Whether it is the implementation team and their morale and motivation of that, or for the challenges of the user, their learning curve, their training, and then at the end of the implementation, the celebration not just of the IT team and that project team, which obviously has worked very hard, but also somewhere to celebrate the user's experience of that transition. And I think that is another piece that I would sort of simply add to that list, that very often we tend to, we celebrate what those guys did, and we tend to forget that the user really made it all happen. So to me, it is, when you finish watching a movie, you see the credits rolling up. It's you also perhaps, if it was possible and in technology, it's certainly possible, is also to give the audience a big hand to say that, okay, you sat through this and you enjoyed that experience and you sort of spend time appreciating the effort we put in. So I think both people need to celebrate each other's work. I think communication, therefore, if I had to summarize, it is the effort that we put into this communication and putting the technical part of it and the human part of it together. What stitches us together is communication, and very often that is the part which does not get as much attention.
Right. And the next question is from Sandeep Tori, and he is asking, well, before we get to that, William, if you can talk about it from a US perspective, that would be great. What are some of the biggest hurdles that organization in United States when it comes to HR tech implementation?
Honestly, the only thing I'd add would be that our biggest challenge is the status quo. And the status quo is that everyone hates change, turns out. Some people are able and apt to consume change at a higher rate, but everyone, what binds us, all human beings hate change. So I think that if we can get people over the hurdle of change faster, and that's all that, if you take your early adopters and your laggards and all of the people on the user adoption curve, if we can get them over that hurdle faster, that getting consumption of change faster, that's the game.
All right. And the next question is from Sandeep Tori, and he is asking, does senior management role go beyond giving blessings and having a buy-in? Well,
yeah, it goes to money.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's only partially a joke.
Absolutely, we cannot deny that fact, because what happens is that investment. Yeah, investment in it continue to remain secondary when it comes to taking money or spending. So, what are your takes when it comes to giving a foremost importance for the money that we spent for the HR tech implementation, and if so, how much would that be?
Is this the question for me, Nisha?
Yes, absolutely, Jeremy.
I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do, to prove that the money that they've invested, because there's different components of software cost. There's the software itself, there's the implementation cost, there's the ongoing support. Proving that how that adds up is actually returning real value and has a positive return on investment is the toughest thing that you can do. You know, and yet it's the holy grail, because if you can prove to senior management that not only are they getting the soft benefits and, you know, freeing up people's time to do other activities, you know, any kind of self-service can add some value, but if you can actually prove monetarily that you've added value to the company and are contributing to the bottom line, that's the holy grail, and that's, you know, that's going to get the buy-in. I was asked to say the word buy-in on social media, so that's what gets you the buy-in.
All right, one more question, and then we will wrap up. And it is asking about the important technology that we should use to manage implementations. So do you suggest any tools and technologies in order to manage implementations? Yeah, Jeremy,
Yeah.
like...
Yeah, I can chime in. That was one of the 5 factors I gave as far as things that lead to a successful implementation. So the technology of the implementation itself is critical. You know, things like data loaders. You've got, you know, not just necessarily configuration guides, but actually configuration tools that go into that. You have the concept of actual data mapping tools. So some vendors actually have, I'm sorry, not data, but process mapping. So an actual visualization of a process and how that translates into different authorization flows. So yeah, the technology of an implementation is critical. It can be non-existent, which puts more work on the actual team, and it's more of an individual thing, or it can be automated to the point where you still have flexibility, but it keeps the control over the implementation.
All right. And then
I think sustainable advantage comes from really the the vision that one started off with. I mean, why does one want that implementation done? You know, so I think the overall vision for that implementation. So that, I think the answer to that question really lies there. Having said that, today I think the power of the data, to give us insights. You know, so whether it is for managing a business problem, whatever that business problem could be, whether it's attrition or is it identifying talent or whether it's anything else. I mean, at the end of it, if it is giving an impact on business rather than just a terrific, technologically advanced system, I think that's the difference between the two. If it is impacting business, it is sustainable. If it is just a great implementation technologically, I think it's not. So I think people are fascinated with terrific technology for a very short while, but ultimately it's the business competition, the business advantage that makes something sustainable.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, Jeremy and Mr. Abhijit Badri and William Tincup, and I'm sure Anil Kumar Mishra and Abhijit Badri, Anand Pillai have tried to call in, and for some reason they might not be able to log in. But again, we had a wonderful conversation and insightful discussion on HR tech implementation, and thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your time that you carved in to join in here on your busy schedule. So, yep. Jeremy, if you can talk about your upcoming travel to India, you and William will be there at the HR Tech SHRM conference in India. If you can talk about it, that would be great. So our audience can connect with you, come and give you a handshake, and continue this conversation after that.
Right. So April 24th in Mumbai, we'll be at the SHRM Tech conference. I'll be a key speaker at that event. I plan on talking a lot about some of the things I've been blogging about for SHRM India, and I'm excited for it. I just wrote a blog for them that should be published, and I actually incorporate the festival of Holi into the mix. I went to a celebration last week, which was really exciting, and I'm wearing my green for St. Patrick's Day. So there's a whole theme going on with colors right now. So yeah, I'm really excited. It'll be my first. I've worked with India a lot over the years, and Indian counterparts and teammates, and I've never actually been in the country. So I'm really excited to go and to talk to the crowd and to meet people. So
Well, good luck and have a wonderful journey to
Thank
India,
you.
and I'm sure you will have a great time. So again, thank you so much to Mr. Jeremy and Mr. Abhijit Baduri and Valentin for joining with us and having this wonderful conversation, and to all of our audience. And we really, really appreciate your tweets and questions and thoughts, and look forward to having your support again for the next show. And until then, and this
Thank you very much indeed.
concludes.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.